Hello, my name is Dr. Janine Butler, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Transforming Classroom Grading Practices in conjunction with Eastern Washington University and Excel Education Resources. In this 4-unit course, we will be discussing the key elements of the why, what, when, how, and who of effective grading practices that lead to student success and equity. We will begin our course by discussing the ongoing grading dilemma. In 2000, Marzano wrote his first book, Transforming Classroom Grading. And since that time, there have been many other books and articles written about our broken grading system. Captured in Myron Dweck's quotation, in countless classrooms, there are grading practices that fundamentally undermine the purpose of education. In his book in 2000, Marzano asked, why would anyone want to change current grading practices? He responded that the answer is quite simple. Grades are so imprecise that they are almost meaningless. In their book, What We Know About Grading by Guskey and Brookhart, they ask, in what decade was the first research conducted on the inconsistency and unreliability of grading practices? What do you think? Well, it turns out that the earliest research on the extent of unreliability in grading dates back to the 1880s. This issue has been going on for quite some time, so I'm very excited that you are here to help address the ongoing grading dilemma. We'll begin with some foundational questions. How confident are you that grades in your school are consistent across subject areas, grade levels, teacher by teacher? That they accurately communicate student academic progress, that they're connected to state and national standards, and that they're meaningful for each and every learner. In this course, we will discuss the essential questions of why do we grade, what should we grade, how and when do we grade, and who grades. On this slide, you will find the learning targets, in which we take these essential questions and begin to apply them to you and your classroom context. By the end of this course, you will have a plan for how you will establish an effective grading system. In this slide, we see each of the units as well as the modules within each unit. Again, the sources for this workshop are many, but not exhaustive. However, I have purposefully listed these primary sources chronologically so that you can see how long we have been working on this issue. There are 9 handouts for this course. There's a reference list of those resources, as well as a unit and modules checklist. There are 3 worksheets for you to print off and use along the way. One is a reflections worksheet, which is to be used during and after each module. There's a literature review worksheet on which you can keep track of different authors or articles or videos, including those that you find outside this presentation. And we will be considering some scenarios, and there's a reflection worksheet for those as well. At the end of Unit 1, you will be writing a paper on why do you grade, and there's a rubric for that in the handouts. In Units 2 through 4, there will be a unit planning template example for you to be using as we begin to explore your practices in your classroom. That will also include a handout for Unit 3 for strategies of the when and how. The final project will be for you to have a plan for setting up your own classroom system to transform your grading practices, and there's a rubric for that. So you might want to pause this presentation right now and make sure that you have any of these handouts at the ready, especially the reflections worksheet that you will be using at the end of each module. Okay, here we go. Unit 1, why do we grade? There are 5 modules in this unit. Module 1 is, what are the purposes for grading? Module 2 is feedback as a purpose for grading. In Module 3, we look at criterion versus norm reference purposes of grading. Module 4, motivation as a purpose for grading. And Module 5, grading in the brain, developing growth mindset. Module 1, what are the purposes for grading? Are they administrative, for feedback, guidance, instructional planning, motivation, or something completely different? What do you think? In a moment, we're going to look at some data on the following slide, and we will reflect on these purposes, reference, and basis for grades. As you look at this data, I want you to notice not only the differences in the responses, but also the differences between teachers and administrators. This comes from Transforming Classroom Grading by Robert Marzano in 2000, in which he asked teachers and administrators to respond to what they believed would be the purpose of grades and the reference for grading and the basis for grades, in which he had them either give a 1, meaning they highly disagree, it's not a purpose, not a basis, or a 4, they highly agree. So take a moment and ask, what did teachers believe was the primary purpose of grades, or in which category did they give it a 4? Same with administrators. Similarities, differences among teachers and administrators? In reference for grading, did teachers and administrators feel that norm reference grading or criterion reference grading was most important? And finally, what did teachers and administrators feel was the basis for grades? Academic achievement? Attendance? Take a few moments to look at this data. We are now at the end of Module 1, in which you will reflect and write around the following questions. Again, utilize your reflections worksheet. What are your reflections on the purpose, reference, and basis for grades? What do you notice regarding responses among those categories? What do you notice in responses between teachers and administrators? And take a few moments to really look deeply. Why do you grade? Module 2 focuses on feedback as a purpose for grading. Research suggests that most teachers and administrators believe that feedback is the most important reason for grading. Some questions we ponder in this module are, how are standards-aligned formative and summative assessments implicated in feedback? If feedback is designed to improve student learning, when should it be provided? And how should feedback be used by students? Moss and Brookhart maintain that feedback is a teacher's response to student work with the intention of furthering their learning. They also give some guidelines around what feedback should be. In How to Give Effective Feedback to Your Students, Brookhart adds that the student should be part of the feedback equation. Teacher feedback is input that, together with students' own internal input, will help the students decide where they are in regard to the learning goals they need or want to meet and what they will tackle next. In Visible Learning, Hattie states that feedback is the most powerful when it comes from the student to the teacher. Effective feedback draws a student's attention to their own learning strategies and progress by engaging them in formative questions such as, where am I going? How am I going? Where am I going to go next? Again, feedback is the most powerful when it is from the student to the teacher. Marzano gives us more information about feedback as a purpose for grading through the research results. It turns out that if a teacher simply just tells students it's right or wrong, student performance can actually go backward. But if students understand the learning target, if teachers give full explanations and students are reassessed until they're proficient, we can increase their academic achievement by 20 percentile points. Feedback and grading research shows that student achievement is higher for students receiving only descriptive comments instead of letter grades. Why would that be? In a moment, we might consider this further as we look at brain research. In Gladwell, Bridget Homry has quoted as saying, high quality feedback is where there is a back and forth exchange to get a deeper understanding. I love what Reeves says here. While there is inevitably a final grade, that is but a postscript to a very long letter. Much earlier than the final grade, students should receive a steady stream of feedback, much in the way that students in music and sports receive coaching feedback that is designed not merely to evaluate their performance, but to improve it. Research from Hattie, Marzano, Reeves, Dillon, and William, as well as other cross-cultural research, maintains that feedback is not only more important than most other instructional interventions, it is also more important than socioeconomic status, drug use, nutrition, exercise, anxiety, family structure, and a host of other factors that many people have claimed are overwhelming. Indeed, when it comes to evaluating the relative impact of what teachers and educational leaders do, the combined use of formative evaluation and feedback is the most powerful combination that we have. Let's think about that again. The combined use of formative evaluation and feedback is the most powerful combination, much more powerful than these other factors that we often claim are overwhelming and a large barrier to learning. Please pause this presentation now and using your reflection worksheet, reflect and write about the following. If feedback is the most important reason for grades as reported in research surveys and is designed to improve learning, how are standards-aligned formative and summative assessments implicated in that feedback? When should feedback be provided? How should feedback be used by students? And what are any new ahas you have about feedback, and how does it show up in your classroom? In Module 3, we consider norm-referenced versus criterion-referenced grading. Most teachers and administrators believe that criterion-referenced grading is the most appropriate. What we want to question now is, does this belief match current practice? Are teachers even aware of the standards and criteria they should use to determine criterion-referenced grading? Are students aware of the standards and criteria being used to determine grades? On this slide, we simply see definitions of norm-referenced versus criterion-referenced, with the main difference being that in norm-referenced, students are compared to other students in terms of their performance. However, in criterion reference, an individual's score is determined solely on whether or not they possess the knowledge or skill that is delineated for that criterion. For more information about norm reference versus criterion referenced, please take a look at this website. Interestingly, they also make the case that using criterion referenced grading also benefits the workplace. In a moment, please pause this presentation and using your reflection worksheet, consider the following. Research surveys suggest that educators believe that criterion reference grading is the most appropriate. Does this belief match current practice in your school? Are teachers aware of the standards and criteria they should use to determine grades? Are students aware of the standards and criteria being used to determine grades? How do criterion reference practices show up in your classroom? Module 4 has us considering grades as motivation. Consider the following scenarios on grades as motivation. How might these scenarios be implicated in your classroom grading practices? Here you may also utilize the scenarios reflection worksheet as well as the general reflections worksheet. Scenario 1, consider your typical class of students. What does the letter F represent to most students? Or if you are in a school that is utilizing some other criteria or label like 1, what does that mean to most students? How does using an F or other low grade contribute to an effective grading system for all students? In scenario 2, we ask and talk about how Sam receives his very first F on his 6th grade report card. Very first F, 6th grade. How might this impact Sam's attitude and effort? Take a few moments on your scenarios worksheet to just jot some of your thoughts down about this. You might even want to reference some of your own experiences when you were a student. Guskey and Bailey tell us that no studies support the use of low grades as punishment. Instead of prompting greater effort, low grades more often cause students to withdraw from the learning. So back to Myron Dweck's quote at the beginning of this presentation of how grading practices can undermine our purposes for education. Do we want students to withdraw from learning? So let's take a look at our grading practices to see, are the grading practices we're using cause students to withdraw from their learning, or does it draw them into their learning? This is a slide from a high school math teacher who wanted to have a discussion with her high school math department about their use of the F. The point of this slide is to simply ask ourselves, how often are we having uncomfortable and courageous conversations with our colleagues about our grading practices? Pause this presentation and go to this YouTube video of Myron Dweck, who wrote Grading Smarter, Not Harder, around grading as penalty. See you back here in a moment. As we reflect and write on Module 4, Grading as Motivation, considering the literature and research on grading and motivation, are grades an extrinsic or intrinsic motivator? Why or why not? Are grades a motivator for all students? How are grading practices implicated in your school mission to develop independent, self-directed, lifelong learners? How might your beliefs about grades as motivation show up in your classroom? In Module 5, we will be discussing grading in the brain and facilitating a growth mindset. We will be asking, what do we know now about the brain that informs our grading practices, and how might we engage students to be our active assessment partners so that they develop a growth mindset? We start by asking, what does brain research tell us? The brain is highly complex, but is basically made up of 3 major parts. The neocortex is where executive function takes place, such as problem solving, innovation, reflection. The limbic system, in the middle of our brain, is where the structures are housed for emotional responses within the amygdala, signified by the purple almond shape object on this graphic. And the memory is found in the hippocampus, which is illustrated by the aqua loop that links the limbic system to the neocortex. The brainstem, which is found in the back of your head when you go to give yourself a little massage at the back of your neck when you're sitting at the computer for so long. This is where the brainstem lies, and it's primarily responsible for survival. When our senses come into our limbic system and it makes a decision about the emotional response it will make, it will either shift it up into the neocortex where it will be categorized and problem solved and pondered, or it will shove things into the brainstem. And when we're in trouble, we go into that brainstem and we experience fight, flight, or freeze, which is known as neural downshifting. The importance of this brain concept is that no significant learning can occur during a neural downshift. In this slide, we talk about a more microscopic concept of the brain called neuroplasticity, which is our really great hope. So when you look at these two pictures, the one on the left is a slide from the brain of a newborn, and the one on the right is a slide from the brain of a 2-year-old. What do you notice about the differences between these two slides? These two slides exemplify neuroplasticity. Our brain is always growing and changing. We're always developing new neural pathways, including until the moment we die. One researcher has stated that all learning is a physiological brain change. So by the end of this 4-part series on transforming grading practices, if you have learned anything, your brain will actually be physiologically changed from when you first started the course. Take just a short reflection. How might the concept of neural downshifting be implicated in our grading practices? And how might the concept of neuroplasticity be implicated in our grading practices? Again, pause this presentation briefly to just think about the role of brain research and our grading practices. We move down now to talking about Carol Dweck's research on mindset. In her research, she determined that people are either in a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. The important thing that she found in her research is that your mindset, fixed or growth, determines your self-image. It also determines your intellectual risk-taking, and it determines your initiative. But the most important finding of her research is that we can change mindset with the right guidance and the right environment. That any fixed mindset human can be changed to becoming a growth mindset human when given the right guidance, relationship, and environment. As she said, when we put people in a fixed mindset with its focus on permanent traits, they quickly fear challenge and devalue effort. This harkens back to our discussion about the use of the letter F and Guskey and Bailey talking about the research around low grades causing students to withdraw from the learning. Is it possible that our grading practices actually put students in a fixed mindset or in a neural downshift? And both of those things, again, do not contribute to our primary purpose of education, which is advancing student learning. So as we finish Module 5, pause this presentation and using your reflection worksheet, reflect on what are you now thinking about the brain that informs your grading practices? How might you provide grading practices that encourage intrinsic motivation for learning and foster growth mindset for your students? How does implementing brain-compatible grading practices align with your instructional frameworks and around the concept of safe and civil schools? We now finish Unit 1, Why Do You Grade? Your assignment for this unit is to review your reflection literature review and scenario handouts from the 5 modules in Unit 1, Why Do We Grade? How does the question, why do we grade, apply to you in your classroom? Then you will write a 3 to 5 page position paper on why do I grade? Please utilize the rubric found on this slide. In this paper, please give us a personal purpose for why you want to even examine your classroom grading practices. And then address the literature and your personal practice in using feedback, norm versus criterion reference purposes for grading, grades for motivation and growth mindset, and take note of your organization, language and vocabulary, and conventions. This now ends Unit 1, Why Do We Grade? See you soon for Unit 2.